on liability and COVID-19 as it relates to Kiwanis and Kiwanis clubs. The Carolinas District of Kiwanis puts on this year, our goal is to put on at least 2 webinars each month, and we're thrilled to be with you tonight. So this is a very sobering topic, and I'm going to begin by just giving us a few COVID-19 statistics that are very sobering and somewhat alarming. The first case of COVID documented in the United States by the CDC, Center for Disease Control, was January 20 of this year. That's the first one they documented. They actually think people had COVID here as long as last December. That was one day. January 20 was one day before Kiwanis celebrated its 105th birthday. Our birthday as an organization is on the 21st of January every year. This is a person that had traveled to Wuhan, China, and came back to Washington State infected with COVID-19. So here's some figures as of November 11. On November 11, only 5 days ago, on that day alone, there were 142,856 new cases of COVID-19 in the United States. We'd had 10.5 million cases and 242,000 deaths. That information that's 5 days ago is so woefully out of date. As of 5 o'clock this afternoon, according to Johns Hopkins, there have been 11,163,990 cases in the United States and 246,953 deaths. I watched CNN for about 20 minutes and the death toll went up by 100 while I was watching the news. So in the last 5 days alone, 663,990 new cases. And the last 5 days alone, 4,953 deaths and counting. So about 1,000 deaths a day. And while we are only 4% of the world's population, we have between 19 and 20% of all the deaths and all the cases in the world. In the Carolinas, we have about 15.5 million people. And as of November 11th, we had over 500,000 cases in North and South Carolina and almost 9,000 deaths in the Carolinas district. And while it took 100 days in this country for COVID-19 to reach 1 million cases, we have had 1 million cases in the last 10 days. So when it comes to COVID-19, my takeaway, and I'm not an expert on this, but my takeaway, I think it's very obvious that COVID-19 right now is getting worse, not better. And we're entering the winter where we'll have flu season, we'll have COVID-19, people will be brought indoors to more confined spaces where we're not outside, where the air circulation's better. People are going to be gathering for Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, and in all likelihood, COVID-19 in the near term is going to get worse. It's our hope that in 2020 with vaccines, and the news on that in the last 2 weeks is very promising, but with vaccines and therapeutics, hopefully in the spring of next year, hopefully, we can have some beginning of a return to normalcy. But that's not where we are faced with, that's not what we're faced with today. So in this presentation, and with that as a background, we're going to go through about 5 screen shares in just a few minutes, not right now, but just a few minutes. The first screen share will be a disclaimer and also kind of a recent timeline on what's happening with Kiwanis as it relates to COVID-19 and the news that we received about insurance coverage as it relates to COVID-19. That'll be the first document. The second document will be the Kiwanis International Guidelines and insurance coverage changes that Kiwanis International issued on October 12th. 2 days later, the Carolinas District and our District Secretary Leah put them in CD News, where it would be available for y'all to see. She put them in the Carolina Kiwanian, which went out on October 30, the magazine for the Carolinas District for you to see. And it's also prominently displayed on our Carolinas District website, www.carolina.Kiwanis, that's Carolina with no S, .org. The third document we'll look at is a COVID-19 event checklist. We'll go through each one of these. The fourth document is something some of you have heard about and are familiar with, and that is a release of liability and assumption of risk document that was issued as a sample contract or a sample agreement by Kiwanis International. It originally came out on October 12 when these guidelines came out. Kiwanis International has made some slight revisions to that form agreement, and they reissued a revised version on November 4th. To see the latest version, we're going to have it up on the screen later, but to see the latest version, you can get a copy of it by going to the Carolinas District website. That's the place you'd look for it, not the earlier CD News or the Carolina Kiwanian. Go to the district website. The fifth document and the last document that we'll look at tonight is going to be a copy of a North Carolina law, North Carolina General Statute 99, Chapter 99E, E as in Edward, Sections 70, 71, and 72. It's called the COVID-19 Limited Immunity Statute in North Carolina. It was passed by our legislature, codified and enacted and effective immediately back on June 24th of this year. Before we look at the documents, just a couple more pieces of information. 10 days after Kiwanis International issued its new guidelines on insurance, on COVID-19 and insurance coverage changes, the general counsel at Kiwanis International, his name is David Kress, K-R-E-S-S. He had a webinar where Kiwanians were invited to attend and kind of be brought up to date on the latest information as it relates to insurance coverage or non-coverage, as the case may be, and the waiver and other issues. Both Leah and I attended that webinar back on October 22nd. He gave a few disclaimers up front. One disclaimer that he indicated is there is no federal law on COVID-19 immunity or safe harbor. The federal government, the executive branch, the legislative branch have not acted in this area. And they have pretty much left it to the 50 states to fend for themselves as to how they will handle issues of COVID-19 liability. There are no known appellate court rulings or opinions on people bringing COVID-19 claims against businesses or corporations or NGOs or nonprofits or service organizations like Kiwanis. No known court opinions at the appellate level on the issue of liability for someone claiming that they contracted COVID-19 at a gathering or event. That takes time. And so, but nothing yet. He did point as a source, and I'll just give you this information if you're curious and want to look. Most any major law firm, large law firms will have some type of information dedicated to COVID-19. And he cited a tracker where you can track cases in jurisdictions. It is from the law firm of Hunton, H-U-N-T-O-N, Andrews, A-N-D-R-E-W-S, Kurth, K-U-R-T-H, LLP. And their website on this is, and when you do a Google search, it just pops right up, www.huntonak.com/en/COVID-19 tracker. If anyone is interested, you can look and they keep up with information on a state-by-state basis. It shows that there have been COVID claim cases brought in North Carolina and South Carolina. Doesn't mean that they're on personal injury grounds. They could be attacking executive orders and things of that nature. But there is litigation in the Carolinas on COVID-19. So he also went on to give some guidance, David Kress, some guidance. and indicated first and foremost, follow all laws. That includes federal, state, and local laws, particularly as it relates to wearing a face mask, social distancing, gathering sizes. Kiwanis International's bylaws say that all Kiwanis clubs will follow federal, state, and local law. And that applies to any issue, including COVID-19. That would also include executive orders issued, whether it's from the governor of North or South Carolina, whether it's executive orders or ordinances that are passed at your county level or your local level. That's the first thing. The second thing is he strongly encourages, and these as a guidance, that if you're having a Kiwanis gathering, and that could be a club meeting, a club service project, a club fundraiser, an SLP event. If you're having a Kiwanis gathering, you should have a temperature screening. And if someone has a temperature and shows up to your event with a temperature, in their guidance, it was 100.4, not 104, but 100.4 degrees. Your jurisdiction or your area may have a different number, but that is what they had in their guidance. But if someone has a temperature, they should be asked to go home and not attend the Kiwanis gathering. That was his second recommendation. A third was that clubs and districts and divisions should use a COVID-19 waiver, a release of liability and assumption of risk document for their gatherings. And we'll talk about his suggested document when we get to showing them and sharing them on the screen. Now, I'm thinking about, just from an analogy, I am a lawyer, and I frequently have to go into courthouses here in North Carolina, and I see pretty much the same way they approach it at every government building. And that is, there's always someone out front. Think of that as your registration area. There's usually a deputy sheriff out front, the registration area where someone has a firearm. But there's someone there that will ask you questions, and questions are usually posted on the wall. Do you have any of these symptoms? And they take your temperature. And they do all this before you are permitted to go through security and go into a building. They also have signs posted there that will say, you're required to wear a mask. You're required to socially distance. You should make sure that you've washed your hands or used hand sanitizer, and sanitizer is available. And then when you go into courtrooms, they have taped off where you can sit, where you can stand, to make sure you're socially distanced. I see that frequently, and that's kind of what we're talking about and what he suggested in his remarks. But here's my takeaway from Mr. Kress's presentation, and that is the guidelines are called guidelines. And his remarks was, this is my guidance to you. And so it's not a mandate. These are their strongly suggested guidelines. When it comes to what you're going to do in your clubs are separately incorporated. Your clubs have its own boards of directors. You're responsible for making the ultimate decisions on what your club does regarding how you're going to treat potential COVID-19 spread, potential COVID-19 liability for your gatherings. With that takeaway, I feel compelled to say that boards of directors, the officers and the directors, individually and collectively owe a duty of care to the club, a duty of care to your organized business. And that duty of care, generally speaking, and I just took this from a description from the National Council of Nonprofits. This is not from a court opinion in North Carolina or South Carolina. But the duty of care generally is taking care of the nonprofit by ensuring prudent use, reasonable and prudent person standards, prudent use of all assets, including facilities, people, and goodwill of the corporation. So that being said, in your clubs, your boards of directors are going to have to make the decisions as to what things you enact and how you enact them and when you gather and how you're going to gather. Now, with all that kind of as an introduction, Leah, if you could please pull up the first document, the disclaimer and recent timeline. And what we're going to do here is a couple things. First of all, after each document, I'll ask Leah, was there anything that she would like to add? I'll ask if there are any questions, and you can just unmute yourself at that time and ask questions, or feel free to post something into the chat room, and Leah can either answer your question directly, or before we move on to the next document, Leah can tell me what's in the chat room, and we'll try to address it as best as we can. First of all, you will see an all caps, boldface, in red disclaimer. And that's just something that I feel that just compelled to say and to go over with you. And that is this. While I'm making this presentation to y'all as the governor of the Carolinas District, and while I am a licensed attorney in North Carolina, I am not the attorney. I'm not a retained attorney for the Carolinas District or any of its clubs or any of its members. I am not offering legal advice as an attorney, and this presentation does not create an attorney-client relationship with any club, person, or viewer. Furthermore, just as a disclosure, I am not licensed to practice law in the state of South Carolina. I may make a few references to South Carolina as I understand the law to be there, but I'm not making them as an attorney licensed in South Carolina. So the purpose of this webinar is to inform clubs as to what the Kiwanis COVID-19 guidelines are, some developments that we've been made aware of by Kiwanis International, but ultimately the decisions have to be made by the boards of directors of local Kiwanis clubs. Now, with that stated then as a disclaimer, just for the record, let's advance down, Leah, with this timeline. And this is to kind of show you why we felt compelled that we thought it would be a good idea to have a webinar on this topic as soon as possible to get information out to the district so clubs can be informed. So October 12th was the day that Kiwanis International came out with its new guidelines and insurance coverage changes. So 2 days later, once we found out about them, I think we found out about them on the 13th, and we promptly put it in the CD News, which goes to every Kiwanis member in North and South Carolina through constant contact. It should be in your email inbox. When you go back to your clubs and you're talking with your members, if they're saying, what's CD News, or I don't get CD News, in all likelihood, it would be because her or his email address is not current. So if your club president or your club secretary will make sure that if there's anyone in the club not receiving CD News, get us their email information, then Leah can check her constant contact records, verify it, and if necessary, update our email address information. But it came out in the CD News on the 14th. The guidelines were there, the checklist was there, and also the sample waiver, release of liability, and assumption of risk document was put out there on the 14th. They were also put in the e-magazine Carolina Kiwanian on October 30. And the same thing there. It goes to every member of the Carolinas District, their inbox, their email inbox. If they are not receiving it, you can ask in your club. Same thing applies. Get their updated email address, have the club secretary contact Leah. She can make sure that information is current. So then on November 4th, Kiwanis International reissued a revised waiver and release of liability and assumption of risk document. agreement on the 4th. That is the most current that we've been provided by Kiwanis International. So if you want to see a copy of that or print out a copy of that you can use or review for your purposes, you need to go to the Carolinas District webpage and do it. The one on CD News from October 14 and the one in the Carolina Kiwanian from October 30 is out of date. The most recent, the most current release form is found on the Carolinas District website. On November 10th, Governor Roy Cooper here in North Carolina issued his most recent executive order 176. There've been a series of them since the original order back in mid-March, and he extended phase 3 of the North Carolina reopening plan, if you will, which took effect last Friday, reducing the number of people that can be in an in-room or a social gathering from 25 back down to 10 due to all the spiking in COVID contagion here in North Carolina. The very next day, Leah published the Governor Cooper's new executive order, also frequently asked questions. Those can be found in the November 11th CD News. And on the 13th at 5 o'clock is when that went into effect. So that is just a chronology or timeline as to what has happened in the last 30 days, if you will, that led us to have this webinar tonight. Leah, do we have any questions right now? Anything in the chat, or is there anything you would like to add before we go to the guidelines themselves?
We do not have any questions in the chat. If you do have a question, you will need to unmute yourself, as I have muted everyone.
Let's move to the next document then. While you're doing that, if anyone has a question, you can raise it. If not, you can always raise it later, but we'll go into the next document. And the second document should be new Kiwanis International Guidelines and Insurance Coverage Changes. There we go. And that's how it appeared in the in CD News and how it's appeared at the district level. All right. So let's look at these guidelines. We're just kind of going to go down through them. I'm going to treat this as if you have not seen them or not familiar with them, but we'll just kind of hit the highlights. Again, these are in the first paragraph. Kiwanis International has compiled guidelines for clubs and districts. As I said earlier, it's in the second and the last line, has compiled guidelines for clubs and districts to help members continue serving safely. This is not a mandate. This is their very strongly suggested guidance to Kiwanians and Kiwanis clubs in the Carolinas District. There are a number of bullet points. First, follow all federal and local laws. And it goes on to discuss things such as gathering sizes, social distancing, and mask requirements. The second bullet point deals with coordinating with the venue. So you may be doing all you think you need to be doing as Kiwanians as far as social distancing, wearing masks, hand sanitizer, things of that nature, taking a questionnaire or going through the checklist and making sure you don't have any of the symptoms of COVID. But if you're meeting somewhere such as a country club or a restaurant or some other meeting space and there are personnel there, what are they doing? You need to coordinate with the venue to see what their employees are doing regarding social distancing, regarding the employees at the venue wearing masks, regarding how they do food service and how safe is food service, and should you have food service. These are issues that your club's board of directors should consider. And how does the venue where you're meeting, what do they do to clean their surfaces and to make sure that it's a safe venue to meet? What about their HVAC system, their air circulation, et cetera, whether you're meeting indoors or outdoors? Those are all things that your board of directors could and should consider. The next bullet point deals with consider, it doesn't say require, but consider that attendees obtain a negative COVID-19 test before meeting, and it's strongly considered for any gathering of 50 or more people. And I'm thinking that something like this would probably more apply to if we say a district convention or a district mid-year conference, which, by the way, our district mid-year conference, which will be on Saturday, March 6, 2021, is going to be virtual, just as our district convention back on August 15th was VCon or virtual. Our 2021 mid-year conference will be virtual, so we won't have to worry about that. But consider COVID-19 test. I'm not going to get into the weeds on this because a COVID-19 test is probably effective at the time the test is taken and not 2 days later or 5 days later or 10 days later, that type of thing. But this is something that the board of directors can consider when they're planning on having a Kiwanis in-person gathering, be it meeting, service, or fundraiser. The next bullet point, require all attendees to sign a waiver that states anyone who believes they may have contracted COVID-19 at a Kiwanis event waives all related claims against any Kiwanis club, district, or Kiwanis International. Any meeting of youth members younger than 18 in the Kiwanis family will require a signature from a parent or legal guardian. That will be the fourth document we discuss when we go through the waiver, but suffice it to say, it applies not just to Kiwanis Club gatherings, but it should apply to the SLP gatherings also. And if you're dealing with gatherings, in-person gatherings of minors, minors cannot sign and have a legally binding waiver and release of liability and assumption of risk. That would have to be signed by a parent and or a guardian. The next bullet point about conducting temperature test. Conducting temperature tests on all attendees before they enter a meeting area. Here's where you see that where I earlier mentioned that in the Kiwanis International example, they had a temperature of 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit or above. That may change based on anything that's issued by the Center for the Disease Controls or your state public health officials. What's 100.4 today? Maybe some other temperature setting or temperature reading a month from now or 2 months from now. So it's just something to consider. I will say that my club, the Kiwanis Club of Raleigh, held its first in-person event or gathering on Friday, November 6th. And it was, what we did is we had an outside event in the parking lot of the church where we normally meet inside the gym. We limited it to 50 people, which at that time was which is the legal amount that could be for an outdoor event. We had it set up in a tent. There was social distancing, chairs, no tables, no food service at the event. You had to pre-register. There was a registration desk where you had to complete your health questionnaire before you registered and pass that. And you had to complete a health questionnaire when you came to the registration desk before you attended the Kiwanis event. But there was also, and that's why I'm mentioning it right now, there was a temperature screening, a thermoscan screening for each person at the registration desk before they could go and attend the meeting. The next bullet point, ask all attendees to certify. And thank you, Leah, for highlighting these. That's very helpful, much appreciated. To ask the attendees to certify that they've not experienced any of the symptoms of COVID-19. Now, we may find out that a month or 2 months from now, there may be additional symptoms which might need to be added to a checklist. But you'll see here, there is a link, a list of the common COVID-19 symptoms can be found here. Well, that will be one of the documents that we're going to look at in just a minute. But Kiwanis furnished to us a COVID-19 event checklist. Those are the health questions, and they should be completed. And we'll discuss that as we go through those. So those are the bullet points. Now, when you get down to the next paragraph, this is something else that brought this to our attention about starting November 1. This deals with the issue of insurance coverage. One of the things we have as part of our membership with Kiwanis is each Kiwanian and our clubs and our officers and directors and our district officers and directors and board, we're covered by the Kiwanis International Insurance Policy. We pay a fee for that, an annual fee, and it is renewed annually by Kiwanis International and its insurance carrier. And it typically renews on or about November 1 of each year. And we learned on October 12th, as part of this document that you're seeing here, that Kiwanis International informed us that effective November 1, their insurance carrier was adding specific exclusion language, that would exclude coverage under the policy for anyone who maintained that they had contracted COVID-19 at a Kiwanis gathering or Kiwanis event, meeting, fundraiser, service project, a Kiwanis gathering. And the exclusion is a standard clause in new and updated policies, says David Kress. And he further explained that and confirmed that during our webinar that Leah and I attended. All insurance companies, it's our understanding, and he referred that here, are adding the same types of exclusion from coverage for COVID-19 related issues. We haven't dealt with an issue like COVID-19 since the pandemic, the Spanish pandemic flu of 1918. And so I assume insurance carriers just hadn't considered it, but they do now. So you can't get coverage for it. Leah posted, the Carolinas District of Kiwanis is a member, an annual subscriber to the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. And Leah posted to their listserv and asked if any nonprofits were aware of any insurance coverage that would either cover COVID-19 claims or special event coverage, which would cover losses from holding a Kiwanis event, say a fundraiser that had to be canceled, and you had incurred a lot of expenses and that type of thing. Any special event or one-time coverage for economic losses related to COVID-19. And we did not receive any information of any such insurance carriers that were offering this type of coverage. We also reached out to the Carolinas District of Kiwanis Risk Management Chair, Doug Day, an insurance agent and broker. And Doug is not aware of any insurance companies that are writing this type of coverage. And really, why should they? The risk and exposure seems as if it could be very great. So you should be aware, you should make your clubs aware, your Kiwanians in your clubs aware that the insurance policy, which became effective November 1 of 2020 for this next year, does not cover anyone who sues your club or asserts a claim against your club that they contracted COVID-19 at a Kiwanis gathering of your club. All right. Let's see here if there's anything else on that document. Okay, the last thing would be this. If you have any types of insurance coverage questions, go down to the very last paragraph, Leah, if you would, and you can highlight that. Thank you. There is an email address there, riskmanagement@kiwanis.org. So if you have any specific insurance coverage questions, feel free to reach out to them. But as it relates to COVID-19, it's clear what their response will be, and it's not part of your insurance coverage. All right, Leah, we're going to go next to the COVID-19 event checklist. And while you're, okay, you've pulled that up. But before we start, I just wanted to ask, are there any questions regarding the guidelines that we went over? Is there anything in the chat room? And Leah, do you have anything that you wish to add regarding the new Kiwanis International guidelines that we just went over?
We do not have any questions in the chat. I did want to mention the last bullet point that was on that email was to request all people wear masks. Chris didn't mean to skip that one.
So Leah, thank you so much for, here is my Kiwanis governor mask that I'm putting on right there. So yes, I have one even right by my desk. Thank you so much. I missed that, Leah. Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. Guidance from Kiwanis International is that we need to wear masks when we're attending any indoor gathering. Great. Thank you, Leah.
And one other thing I would
Yeah.
suggest is that when your board is discussing this, again, my opinion, but you set down in writing your policy so that you can refer to it, and whomever is in control of the event can refer to it. So everything is clear. I also suggest while you have that registration desk, you have two people, one person checking the temperatures, making sure the waivers are signed, but also somewhere in there, just as he mentioned with the security guard, we obviously don't have security guards in Kiwanis, but you need someone there that can speak with someone that might need to not come to the event because all of a sudden they have a temperature or they've forgotten their waiver form. So we do have to enforce whatever your club board decides is what y'all have to enforce.
That's correct. And we're going to discuss that further when we get to the last document, which is the North Carolina statute on COVID-19 limited immunity and what the statute requires, and then some of the practical aspects of perhaps how you should, just as Leah has said, how you should go about your registration desk or pre-registration for Kiwanis gatherings here during COVID-19. Leah, would you please pull up the COVID-19 event checklist?
Yep, there we go.
There we go. This was part of the October 12 article and guidelines from Kiwanis, and there was a link to it. These are a series of questions. I didn't count them, but about 10 questions. And if someone answers no to any of these questions, if you're having an event or gathering, and you know right now we have to have limits on gathering size, so it just makes sense that in order to make sure that you don't oversubscribe to an event, you need to have some type of registration, pre-registration, if you will. And as part of the pre-registration, the person who is wanting to come to this Kiwanis gathering really should complete whether it's a fillable form that is typed in and they can fill in and complete. That's what we had in our club, the Kiwanis Club of Raleigh. We had a fillable form that we could complete and then submit for pre-registration, or whether it's something that someone fills out and scans or mails to the club secretary, however your club wants to do it, whatever your technology is. But this is the type of checklist that needs to be answered before really any Kiwanis gathering. Anyone who is attending a Kiwanis gathering, because this checklist may affect be concerning a gathering that might take place this week, but that same checklist, this checklist that you completed would be irrelevant 30 days from now. So in effect, every time you have a Kiwanis gathering, you should consider, board of director members, consider having this checklist completed by whoever's attending at the, and again, if you answer yes to any of these, it should be a disqualifier, really. Now, at the bottom, it says, I certify that all answers are true and correct. The person signs it. The person prints her or his name, because if it's like my signature, it's not legible. And then it's dated. Now, this checklist would need to be maintained and retained by the club secretary, because someone could attend this event and subsequent to the event somewhere, somehow contract COVID-19, and they could come back and file a lawsuit or make a claim against your club. and say that they caught COVID-19 at your club meeting, or at your club service project, or at your club fundraiser. And if you have this document is basically an exhibit that could be used to help defend your club. So it must be retained and maintained by your club secretary. Now, the likelihood of, or the possible type of exposure a Kiwanis club would have, again, would be if someone became sick as a result of COVID-19, they assert or claim that they contracted it at an event and they sued you, the cause of action would probably be negligence. They would assert that the Kiwanis club owed a duty of care to whoever was attending the gathering, that they breached their duty of care, that they became sick and injured as a result of contracting COVID-19 and have been damaged. That would be a negligence claim. So under North Carolina law, a negligence claim can be brought. The statute of limitations is 3 years. I'm not licensed in South Carolina, but just a quick Google search, depending on in a standard negligence claim, it's 3 years. But if the person was a minor and was 15, it would be until they reach the age of majority plus 3 years. So it could be longer than 3 years. But as a practical matter, these checklists really should be retained by your club as part of its business records for at least 3 years in case a claim is brought at some point in time down the road against your club. Let's see here. That is the COVID-19 event checklist. Again, that would be event specific, would be my understanding and suggestion. And that would be, one would need to be completed anytime you have an in-person gathering. This health checklist, if you will, should be completed by anyone who is going to attend. Now, in addition to having it pre-registered, let's say you're having pre-registration and the person submitted it and everything's fine. Well, you can register them for the event now, but your event might be 3 or 4 weeks from now. You're going to need to have them fill out one of these again at your registration desk, which is what Leah was talking about. My suggestion would be a registration desk should be outside of wherever it is, or at the entrance, outside the entrance to wherever you're having your Kiwanis gathering. Again, I agree with Leah that you should probably have at least 2 Kiwanians staffing that desk. One Kiwanian would make sure that this checklist is filled out, that it's signed, printed, and dated, and that there are no yes answers to this event checklist. And one of those 2 persons should do a thermoscan of the person that is coming to the Kiwanis event and make sure that they're not sick or running a temperature at that time. And then we'll talk about it in just a little while when we talk about the statute that I was referring to, NCGS 99E 70 through 72. There really should be a posting of information there, and that could be at the registration desk. Information as to what steps are being provided by the club for the attendees' safety at the gathering, and then also what the responsibilities are of the person who is attending the event. All right, so at this time, Leah, why don't we take down the, which you've already done, the event checklist. The next document, and before we go to the next document, will be the release of liability and assumption of risk document. But before we go there, Leah, are there any questions in the chat room? Does anyone have any questions? Or Leah, do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Yes, we did have a question in the chat room. The question was, will all of the documents be available and emailed out to participants of this webinar? So the answer is all the documents that we're covering, except for one, were in CD News and on our website. And the only one that's not there is the statute that Chris is going to go over. If you're interested in that statute after this webinar, if you email me, I'm happy to send it to you. It's not something you're going to probably need to refer to. All those that you need are at the top of the screen of our website. And at the end of this webinar, I can show you exactly where that is on the website.
Very good. Okay. Leah, I thought at one time we put the statute in the Carolina Kiwanian. Did we not do that?
We did.
We did. Okay. Yeah. So you can find the statute in the Carolina Kiwanian, October 30, in your inbox. All right, Leah, if we'll bring up the agreement, please, the release. And this is the November 4th one, Leah?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Thank you. All right. So now we have a page and a half of dry legalese, and we'll get into this briefly, but the document is intended to be, as its title suggests, where people attending your Kiwanis gatherings would sign this legal document and release the club, all of its members, assigns, successors and assigns, and on and on and on, from any liability, and that the person attending this gathering and signing this document is acknowledging that they assume all liability by attending this gathering. This is a Kiwanis International sample release that David Kress drafted and sent out. Now, this is offered to you as a resource. We're not mandating that you use this specific document. You may take this document if you wish. The board of directors in your club take it, and you may tailor it to your specific needs and use. You may take and try to make it a little bit less intimidating, if you will. But you obviously want to include all the essential language of releasing your Kiwanis Club from liability and assumption of risk. Now, ultimately, your board is going to have to review this agreement and whatever agreement or release and assumption of risk document that you decide, and approve it. It can be something, if you have an attorney in your club, you can have your attorney look at it and perhaps do something to tailor it to fit your club's specific needs. If you have an attorney in your community that might be willing to volunteer some time to do it, that's fine too. But let's, and we'll go through the questions and concerns that you have at the end after we go through this document. So paragraph 1. This is when it says, I'm aware of the highly contagious nature of bacterial and viral diseases, including but not limited to the 2019 novel coronavirus COVID-19, referred to as the disease. So this is not an all-encompassing general release of all claims, general release of liability. This is specifically for COVID-19 claims that's defined as the disease. So if someone is saying, why do I need to sign this? I mean, again, this has to be a board decision if you have an event. It is not a general release of liability and assumption of risk. It is specifically for COVID-19 claims. I will note, as far as if the difficulty that someone would have in proving that they contracted COVID-19 at a Kiwanis gathering or really any place, it would be difficult to show, but not impossible. North Carolina and South Carolina have different legal standards on if someone is sued for negligence In North Carolina, the standard is what's called contributory negligence. If the person who brings the lawsuit, in this case, a person sued a Kiwanis Club claiming they caught or contracted COVID-19 at Kiwanis Gathering, if they in any way contributed to their contraction of COVID-19, North Carolina is a contributory negligence state. It's a defense, and they should not be able or permitted to recover against a Kiwanis Club, for example, if they maintain that they called it a Kiwanis event. South Carolina has a different legal standard. South Carolina is not a contributory negligence jurisdiction, it's comparative negligence. And the law in South Carolina is different. I'm not licensed to practice there, but someone in fact could be partially at fault in South Carolina. And as long as they are not principally in fault, or more than 50% in fault, they can still recover, but their ability to cover will be reduced by the percentage of their culpability. But again, different standards. So on this particular paragraph 1, the person is indicating that they're aware of the COVID-19, that they understand the risk involved, that they, okay, we can just go through here some more specific language. The risk that they may be exposed to or contract the disease by engaging in activity. They understand and acknowledge that such exposure or infection may result in serious illness, personal injury, permanent disability, death, or property damage. They acknowledge this risk and that may result from or be compounded by actions, omissions of the company, or excuse me, the negligence of others, including the company and or volunteers. So they're stating they understand, they acknowledge, they expressly acknowledge, they hereby agree, and this part's in all caps, they hereby agree to accept and assume all risks. This is the last few sentences of paragraph 1. Assume all risk of personal injury, illness, disability, death, or property damage related to the disease, arising from my engaging in the activity or in traveling to participate in the activity, whether caused by the negligence of the company or otherwise. So just up front, just saying they know exactly what they're getting into. They fully understand the risk involved. The second paragraph gets into the, if we'll advance down, gets into the actual waiver and release. They expressly, here in writing, expressly waive and release any and all claims now known or hereafter known against the company. That would be defined as your Kiwanis Club and its officers, directors, employees, agents, affiliates, members, volunteers, successors, and assigns, collectively called releasees, on account of any injury, illness, disability, death, or property damage arising out of or attributable to my engaging in the activity, being exposed to, or contracting the disease. And disease, again, is defined at the top of the document as referring to COVID-19 related illness. I covenant not to make or bring any such release claim against the company, again, the Kiwanis Club, or any other releasee, and forever release and discharge the company, again, Kiwanis Club, and any and all releasees from liability for any and all release claims. That is the release of liability language. Paragraph 1 is talking about assumption of the risk. Paragraph 2 is the release of liability. Then 3, we advance down. They acknowledge that they're familiar with state, federal, and local laws, orders, and directives, including CDC. They will comply with all such orders, directives, and guidelines while engaging in the activity of attending the Kiwanis gathering, if you will, including without limitation requirements relating to hand sanitation, social distancing, use of face coverings. They will follow all instructions of the company that you may have at the registration desk or that you may have on your website, advertising a Kiwanis gathering, meeting, fundraiser, service project. While engaging in the activity, I agree not to participate in the activity if I'm experiencing symptoms. That goes back to getting anyone attending the event, to complete that COVID-19 checklist that we discussed just a few minutes ago. such as cough, shortness of breath, fever, if I have confirmed or suspected case of the disease, or have come into contact in the last 14 days with a person who has been confirmed or suspected of having the disease. This paragraph is basically stating that this person is well aware of all the health and safety requirements that they must comply with, and they're going to comply with them. That's the nature of this. We only have 2 more paragraphs in this document. I'm just hitting the highlights. You can read this for yourself. Paragraph 4 is, in essence, the individual signing this agreement to hold harmless the Kiwanis Club and all of the releasees. Solely in the event that a claim is asserted against any releasee due to my breach of any obligations in paragraph 3 above, by not complying with health and safety regulations while attending your event, I shall defend, indemnify, and hold harmless. This is, in essence, the hold harmless provision of this agreement. Hold harmless the company and any other releasees against any and all losses, damages, liabilities, deficiencies, claims, and it goes on and on and on, including attorney's fees and the cost of pursuing insurance providers. Okay. Then the last paragraph is, for the most part, just some boilerplate language that's put in contracts, such as this is the entire agreement. It's an integration clause. This is the entire agreement between the parties. It's in writing. There are no other agreements between the parties. There's a severability clause. Should any provision of this agreement be held invalid, such terms shall be severable from this agreement and shall not affect the validity or enforceability of any other in term. There's a successors and assigns language in here. There's a choice of law provision that if litigation is brought regarding this matter and the allegations of negligence in a COVID-19 related claim, that the designated jurisdiction will be where the activity occurred. That would be in the state of South Carolina or the state of North Carolina, depending where your Kiwanis Club is located. And if no jurisdiction is stated there, then it would be construed, the contract, in accordance with the law of the state of Indiana, where Kiwanis International is headquartered. They acknowledge that they've read this, so they need to sign it, print their name, and date it. Now, this particular document at the top was a release that was intended for a specific date, maybe a specific Kiwanis event, say a fundraiser or a service project, or one specific meeting like our club had on November 6th. But you could revise this document so you wouldn't have to have someone sign it every time they came to a Kiwanis meeting. You could go in and add a simple paragraph that states how long this release of liability and assumption of risk contract shall remain valid. At a presentation David Kress gave, when that type of question was asked, how long does this last? His suggestion was that you wouldn't leave it open-ended. You'd have the document last for a specific period of time. His suggestion was 3 months or quarterly. That being the case, practically speaking, you can think of some issues that could arise, such as it's going to be work for your secretary to have these releases signed by members of your club, for example. If your board of directors so chooses, there would have to be a new release prepared and executed by members on a quarterly basis. And again, because of the statute of limitations involved, the club would need to retain these release of liability and assumption of risk documents during the period of the statute of limitations for any negligence claim for COVID-19. And that would be for North and South Carolina at least 3 years, or if it involved minors, until the minor reached the age of 18 plus 3 years. So food for thought there, but this is their form. It is up to your board and your club whether you wish to use a release of liability and assumption of risk document, and if so, if you want to use this one verbatim, or if you want to take this one and make it tailor it to your club. make it if less intimidating, less onerous, if that's what your decision is. But you have to include essential language in there, essential language where they acknowledge the risk, they assume the risk, and they release the club and all of its members and officers and directors and successors and assigns from any and all liability. You need to have all this sweet spot language in there. So Leah, if you will take that down. And I saw a number of things pop up on the screen. I didn't have a chance to read them as I was going through this. But before we get to the statute, what questions do we have?
So our first question was about the release of liability, an opinion or kind of a question from James Jensen. Why isn't the release of liability and assumption a Cliff Notes version? There's been a big pushback from this form at the last general meeting.
A big pushback from whom?
It says that last general meeting. I think they've used this form, and if it will have James comment, but in my interpretation, the people signing the form didn't know what they were signing.
Right. It's you've heard of it has everything in there in the kitchen sink. It's a very complete, very detailed release of liability and assumption of risk document.
Right.
And it was prepared by Kiwanis International. It was prepared by Kiwanis International's legal counsel.
I mean, this
And
is
that was
right.
hey,
You have individuals out there who are hospitalized with COVID-19 that deny COVID-19 is a problem on the one extreme. So, you know,
Right.
I brought to our last general meeting this 2-page, release form, and I was basically laughed out of the meeting,
There are no easy answers there. There are no easy answers. You know your membership better than anyone else.
Right.
This was drafted by a legal counsel in Indianapolis, Indiana, and his goal was to offer this out to protect Kiwanis clubs and its members. And he did a very thorough job and a very complete document. But that's when I said earlier that it's going to be up to the board of directors for each club to consider a release that is tailored to your membership.
Right. I mean, we have a member that has over 40 years in the insurance industry, and he said he thought, in his opinion, this was kind of like over the top, really. I mean, we're doing things like communicating the things, the list of things that you have, the social distancing, that sort of thing. But in his opinion, this was kind of like over the top.
Okay.
We'll take it up again at the board meeting. And that's why I really attended this, webinar tonight. Now, I'll emphasize there's a recommendation that we do it, but I can tell you where the general membership is coming from. And I'm one of our board members who's been in the insurance industry for over 40 years.
May I make a statement, Chris?
Sure.
Absolutely, please.
So Jim, I hear what you're saying. I think it would behoove you to ask them certain questions, such as, we may not be sued, but if we are sued, how much do you think it costs to retain a lawyer to take this? Who you would have to retain the lawyer until the suit went to court. It could take up to 18 months to go to court. Does your club have enough money to retain the lawyer for that long? We did ask the question to Kiwanis International what they thought the average cost to take this to court would be, and they said 2 to 3 figures. So while it may be over the top, the question to say is, do you think we could afford a lawsuit?
Right. And some people will say, well, I just want to attend meetings and I won't do the service or fundraising things. I don't want to, I have enough issues on my plate. That'll be the reaction to some people. That's the real world.
James, where is your club located?
Bluffton, next to Hilton Head.
Okay. So, well, unfortunately, I don't have the best news for you. when it comes to the next document, and we're not going to bring it up yet because we'll see what
Okay.
other questions we have. North Carolina has a limited liability statute that offers protection for negligence claims to nonprofits. I'm not licensed in South Carolina. However, I just from a search, I am
South
aware
Carolina
that
doesn't
in
have
South
one, Chris.
Carolina, that South Carolina does not have a similar statute or legislation that offers COVID-19 protection. There was a statute introduced in the South Carolina legislature back on June 24th, House Bill 5527, which is entitled the Liability Safe Harbor Act.
Mhm.
But as of September 15, it was still in the Judiciary Committee. I think there was a House bill introduced, a Senate bill introduced, and South Carolina has not enacted legislation which provides protection to nonprofits if they do certain things. So
I mean,
that
we have
release,
there's a local nonprofit that we support a lot of service hours, Bluffton Self-Help, which is a pretty big organization in the Low Country. And they've gone out to us to do a lot of volunteer hours in the Thanksgiving and holiday period. And they're not going out to us, asking us to sign release and waivers and stuff to volunteer hours there, and they've been around for 30 years. I mean, so, I mean, that's what our members are saying to us. Hey, we're volunteering at this local organization that's pretty well received and been doing it for 25, 30 years. They're asking us to supply manpower for their food drives and collections and food distribution and all that. And they're not requiring us to sign any kinds of, releases. Maybe they will. I don't know. They may. This is new.
well, that's their,
COVID-19
that's,
is new, right? So it's
Right.
it's a new thing.
that's their
for us.
business.
Right.
I'm sorry, did you have anything else you want to say before I answer?
No.
Okay, so, okay, thank you. So, well, as to
Chris,
that,
can
as
I
to that
interject?
entity. Hey, Dawn,
Hey, sorry.
please.
Yeah, South Carolina does not have anything like that. It's not looking real good either at this point that there's going to be any legislation like that passes. I would also say, for any nonprofit, you have to protect yourself. Don't base it on what your neighbors are doing.
Right.
And I think an additional point might be, instead of him taking it directly back to the club themselves, Leah and Chris, this is being recorded. I assume it will be posted to the website so that
Yes.
others from his club can watch it, or others from all of our clubs can watch it.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you, Don. And again, James, your club in Bluffton is going to have to, its board is going to have to make a determination,
Right.
knowing that it owes a duty of care to the corporation, what steps it's going to take. Now, and as I was saying, you can have a release. Our club had an event back on November 6th. I mentioned it earlier.
Right.
When you pre-registered for the event, you signed a health checklist. And you also signed, there was a place where you had to check, and it had very simple language, which basically said, I understand that I'm assuming all risk by attending this event, and that I release the Kiwanis Club of whatever from any and all liability, boom, boom, boom. And it was just
let me
a few,
see some, right,
it
some
was
simple
just a-
language would be great, I mean, not this 2-page document, really,
I understand, James, the document provided to you is a sample document from Kiwanis International's legal counsel. And as I've said before, your board could take that document and tailor it to its own use. You can make it, your members, and you can make a release and assumption in a matter of just a few sentences
right?
that may offer protection to your club. I'm not licensed in
Right. I
South
mean, don't get me
Carolina.
wrong. At our next board meeting, I'm gonna push for something. I don't know what that's gonna be, but I'm just playing the devil's advocate. I'm just telling you what reality is,
And we're
In the
also
world-
trying to give you the reality that they may feel that right now, but if someone catches COVID and then they have to be helicoptered to another hospital because there are no beds available, and then all of a sudden they have a bill for $50,000 because it's not covered,
All right.
they're going to remember they didn't sign a liability waiver.
But look, here's
And if you don't think,
different question. So we're having, Salvation Army bell ringing, okay? in December. So we're going to enlist, we're having volunteers from the local key club. So we should probably have the parents or guardians signing some sort of a release or waiver for those students that are under 18, correct?
That is what Kiwanis's guidance is. And the fact that they're key clubbers and they're minors, they can't sign a legal document of
Right.
release of liability and assumption of risk. Their
Right.
parent or guardian would have to do so. Now, in
Right.
case you think that this is something that's just that just doesn't happen and that type of thing, I just went and Googled earlier today one of North Carolina's most well-known law firms that has a plaintiff's practice. They represent people who are injured in car crashes and truck crashes and injured medical malpractice and all kinds of things. And they have a prominent part of their website devoted to North Carolina civil litigation blog. The title, "I have the coronavirus. Can I charge for negligence?"
Right.
And they said, "Contact us. We'd love to talk to you."
I'm sure they
And
would.
this is what they say: if you believe you contracted COVID-19 while working or visiting a private business, you may be able to hold someone liable for your coronavirus treatment. How does a claimant establish negligence in a coronavirus civil torts case? And they go on to say, excuse me, since negligence charges fall within tort law, there must be enough evidence to suggest that more likely than not, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt in a civil context, more likely than not, a specific party's negligence or carelessness caused your COVID-19 contraction. And they acknowledge in their website on COVID-19 that it may be difficult to prove a party's negligence was directly caused you to contract the coronavirus. They acknowledge it's highly infectious, and pinning is their word. The contraction back to a specific time and place may be difficult to prove in a court of law, but that negligence exists. When, for example, if a party's failing to take appropriate action to prevent COVID-19 spread when recommended guidelines and information were known by that party. Well, Kiwanis International put the district on notice. It put Kiwanis clubs on notice. It put Kiwanians on notice. It put boards of directors for Kiwanis clubs on notice. So, and this is being recorded. So what is your club going to do about it? Some of these actions may include employees not wearing gloves, failing to institute social distancing measures, or allowing a sick employee to work, or a sick Kiwanian to attend your Kiwanis event and spread it to other people there who become sick. So if you don't think that this is a reality or a potentiality, you would be mistaken, because it is already out there. We've been going for a good period of time here. Leah, do we have other questions before we bring up the statute?
Yes.
Okay.
So Webster, this is from Webster James, and he had to leave, so he can't comment on it. But he asked, can a release of liability not stand up in court? So I guess he's asking if this is signed, does this keep you from having to be sued?
First of all, having a release of liability and assumption of risk document will not in and of itself keep you from being sued. Anyone can file a lawsuit against anyone. If you follow the news recently, they can be absolutely frivolous in nature. And hopefully if they're frivolous, the courts will dismiss them. But the point of having a release is if you are sued, having a signed release of liability and assumption of risk, having the checklist that this person who sued you completed saying that they were perfectly healthy and everything else, and they didn't have symptoms, and then it can be determined that they in fact had symptoms when they attended your event. Having all this information could help you get a lawsuit against your Kiwanis Club and your board of directors as a group and personally dismissed. It could be used to that effect. That's the purpose for having it. And the earlier you can get, if you're in litigation, the earlier you can get a lawsuit dismissed, it becomes much less costly for your club. Leah said 2 or 3 figures. That's not right. It's the difference between 5 figures and 6 figures as to whether or not you can get a lawsuit dismissed, hopefully early on in the litigation, or whether you have to go the distance. It's extremely expensive, and it would be most Kiwanis clubs, unless there are huge Kiwanis clubs, would not have the assets available to defend a lawsuit for COVID-19 liability. So you need to consider that when you determine whether or not you have a release. And if you have a release, whether or not you're going to use this specific form that was furnished by Kiwanis International, or you can take this form and make a form more tailored to your membership. Your board knows your club. More questions, Leah, before we do this last document?
Yes. Let me see here. Can the release document be electronically signed?
Yes. As long as you have a way to preserve it, an electronic signature. If you have a downloadable form or a fill-in form where they fill in the health questionnaire and sign the release, and you have a way of retaining that for your records, I think you would be in good shape. Other questions?
Just comments that people, I will have you look to the chat yourself for the comments from Dawn. She says, in the legal world, 2-page document is short and condensed.
That's true. That's true. Yes.
And I did mean, when I said 2 to 3 figures, I did mean 5 or 6 figures.
That's okay.
I was thinking
No worries.
after the comma.
No worries. There are not that many law firms that would defend an action like this for $25 or $50. So that's okay. There's no worries there. Would you pull up the statute, please?
Yes.
This is some good news if you're a Kiwanis club in North Carolina. Okay. Here we have a copy of the statute, NCGS 99E-70, 71, and 72, the COVID-19 limited immunity. And you can advance this up some, Leah. Again, there is no similar legislation in North Carolina, in the state of South Carolina than this. If you'll advance this up a little bit. I don't know if you can advance it or not. Is Leah still there?
Sorry, I'm here.
Okay. If you could advance the statute up just a little bit, where section 1's at the top. Okay. 99E-70. So this statute is a protection for negligence claims arising from any act or omission alleged to have resulted in the contraction of the COVID-19 virus. If you look at 99E-72, the definition of a person, and that would include an individual corporation, nonprofit corporation. And that right there should cover your Kiwanis Club and your Kiwanis Club members, the 99E-72. And you can look at 99E-70 subsection 1, and it is specifically referring to COVID-19. Now let's go down to the next statute, which is section 71, Leah. Advance up a little bit, please. I can't see it. Thank you. For limited liability. In section A, in any claim for relief arising from an act or omission alleged to have resulted in the contraction of COVID-19, including any claims based on violation of subsection B of this section, no person would include Kiwanis Club, board members, individual members, shall be liable for any act or omission that does not amount to gross negligence, willful or wanton conduct, or intentional wrongdoing. So what it's saying is this statute it provides you limited immunity for negligence claims. And we talked about earlier that that's the type of claim where your club could, in all likelihood, be sued for someone claiming COVID-19 contraction at a Kiwanis gathering. It excludes, though, as you can see, 3 different things. You're not protected if your club was grossly negligent. Makes sense. You're not protected if your club willfully and wantonly exposed someone to COVID-19. Makes sense. And you're not protected if your club intentionally set out to give someone COVID-19. But who would want to do that? It protects you from negligence claims in this context. But now let's look at B. So B tells you what you have to do in order to receive protection under the North Carolina Limited Immunity Law. Every person, that would be Kiwanis Club, board members, shall provide with respect to any premises owned by the person or under the person's possession, custody, or control. That would be where you meet, where you have a fundraiser, where you have a service project. Reasonable notice, that's key. Reasonable notice of actions, that's key. Reasonable notice of actions taken by the person for the purpose of reducing the risk, not eliminating. They don't require you to be perfect. For the purpose of reducing the risk of transmission of COVID-19 to individuals present on the premises. No person shall be liable for the failure of any individual to comply with rules, policies, or guidelines contained in the notice requirement by this section. This subsection shall not apply to premises owned by an individual other than the premises are used in the operation of a sole proprietorship. So what you need to do at your Kiwanis gathering is have a posted notice. A posted notice of what steps are being taken to help reduce the possible contraction of COVID-19. For example, a notice that says you must wear a face mask at all times during this gathering. A notice that would say you must and you agree that you will be socially distanced a minimum of 6 feet from any other person during this gathering. A notice that would say hand sanitizer has been provided for you here at the registration desk, and you agree to use hand sanitizer before you enter this gathering and when you leave. Whatever the reasonable notices are. Reasonable notice, your temperature is being taken at the registration desk before you enter the Kiwanis event. You agree that you will not enter this Kiwanis event if you fail the thermoscan or the temperature test. What reasonable steps are you taking? You must have it, they must be displayed at the premises. Let me just read something here. As a practical matter, when at these gatherings, you should have a posted notice with actions taken and to be taken to reduce the risk of contamination. Now, whatever you post, you got to do. It's not enough just to have something posted there and you don't follow through on it. You have to be prepared and set up to follow through on what actions you're going to take to reduce the risk of transmission. That's when we suggested earlier, have a registration desk, have a couple of persons at the registration desk, have someone take someone's temperature, make them fill out the health checklist, have a sign posted at the registration desk about wearing a mask, 6 feet apart, social distancing, hand sanitizer, all that kind of stuff. Have that at your registration desk. These actions that are posted should be followed. The posted notice, ideally, this notice would also be, if you require pre-registration, it could be up on your website or your registration where you go to make your registration. You'd have a posted notice as to what things you're going to do at the event to reduce the risk of COVID-19 spread or COVID-19 contraction. But those things should be posted. It should be large enough and legible enough for the attendees there. Someone at the registration desk should point out that sign to someone. And if you do those things, then if someone sues you for a negligence claim saying, I caught COVID-19 at your event, you could raise this statute And this statute would give you immunity for any negligence liability on a claim, on a COVID-19 claim. This legislation won't be around forever. It shows down in 99E-72 on applicability that this legislation will expire no later than 180 days after the expiration or rescission of Executive Order 116. That was Governor Roy Cooper's first executive order on COVID-19, which was issued back on March 10th. So whether it's, hopefully in 2021, this will expire because COVID-19 will not be an issue. It may be the next year or the year following. But this legislation is in place to help protect Kiwanis clubs in the state of North Carolina. Again, there is no such protection by legislation for Kiwanis clubs in South Carolina. All right, Leah, if you'll pull back to where we can see everybody. Those were the documents you wanted to cover and the information you wanted to cover. At this time, Leah, what questions do we have? What comments do you have? Anything in the chat that we need to know about?
Yes. First question, could any of this guidance be relaxed for gatherings / events taking place outside?
Well, I'm not a Dr. Fauci. I'm not an epidemiologist or an infectious disease expert, but I think you can catch COVID-19 outside. You can catch COVID-19 outside if you don't wear a mask, if you don't socially distance, and do things like that. So these protections are applied to Kiwanis gatherings, be it meetings, fundraisers, service projects, be it Kiwanis clubs or any of the Kiwanis family members. So I think even the fact that you're outside, it would still be in your best interest to comply with these guidelines and suggestions from Kiwanis International. Next question.
They've asked if the district can make a template for a poster with the musts, that's in quotes, musts listed for clubs in North Carolina. I feel like each board of directors needs to interpret the law themselves and create their own poster.
It may be different in, you also could have local suggestions from your public health officials that might be different in Wilmington than they are in Columbia, South Carolina versus Florence or Asheville. Just a practical suggestion, and that would be perhaps, I'm sure that there would be a county public health director or similar person wherever your club's located. Contact them, and they may have some type of template there as to things that you could put on your notice, what steps are being taken to protect people attending your Kiwanis in-person gathering. But we all know what CDC has said: wear a face mask, socially distance a minimum of 6 feet apart, wash your hands, use hand sanitizer, things of that nature. Those types of things I would think would be part of any notice, but working with or contacting your local health officials, they may be able to suggest something for you. The next question.
They've asked if we can post the statute. I'm assuming they mean the one you just went over on our website, and I'm happy to put it up there with the other
That'd be great.
statutes.
Very good.
And that's all the
right.
questions so far.
That's all the questions. Well, that's a whole lot. And we normally, these webinars are normally about an hour, and apologize for the fact that this went over about an additional 30 minutes. There's a lot of material to cover. There are a lot of questions. There's a lot of material to cover. It's a serious topic. But I want to thank you for attending this webinar. Anything else before we announce our next 2 webinars?
Yes, I did promise them to show where it is on the website. So let me pull that up really quickly. It's very easy. So let me share my screen one more time. So you would just, so this is our website, carolinakiwanis.org. And here is the information right here at the top. I have posted the executive orders that went into effect at this past Friday at 5. So what I'll do is add here the limited immunity law right here with that information.
Very good. All right.
And it looks
And,
like we have another. Oh,
You
just a
have
comment.
you have a link to the tonight's webinar too?
Yes, sir, I will. It will be on our free webinar resources page. Let me show you where that is. See here, resources, Zoom webinar library. It'll be here. And when it is posted, I'll let you know through CD News. So there'll be a link straight here to the resources. But there's only one of me, and I have to get up the last webinar, and then I'll get up this one because I have to edit it a little bit before
No,
I
'cause
can.
I want to communicate this webinar to their board like ASAP, so they kind of see the, you know, how important it is.
thank you, James. Much appreciated. And thank you, Leah, for showing us where we can find that. I want to tell you there are two, as we indicated, we're going to try to have at least probably 2 webinars per month. They're free on various topics of what we think is maybe benefit to the clubs and the members of the district. Our next one is going to be on Tuesday, December 8th at 7:00 p.m. And that will be a young woman from Charlotte, Anne Mariah Burton. She's a former Key Clubber. She works for an ad agency in Charlotte, and she is going to give a webinar on how we can improve our use of Facebook. The Carolinas District has a Facebook page. We have over 4,800 Kiwanians in the Carolinas District, and our Facebook page has roughly about 600 members.
So Chris just froze.
Carolinas District of Kiwanis. So follow the Carolinas District Facebook page. Did I misspeak, Leah?
No, you were frozen there for a second. So I was.
Okay, thank you. My apologies. Yes, it said unstable, but it was a delay. Thank you. We would love for every Kiwanian in the Carolinas District to follow the Carolinas District of Kiwanis Facebook page. We post a lot of content there that we receive from clubs as to what your fundraisers are, your service projects, so we can share that with other clubs and you can get ideas to help strengthen your clubs. I put a Kiwanis thought of the day on there every day of the week and a motivational or inspirational quote. And we want you to have to do that. So please ask the people in your club to follow the Carolinas District of Kiwanis Facebook page. We'll have that webinar on December 8th. And then there'll be one more webinar in December, and that will be on December 16th. I'll be the presenter, but it'll be a much shorter topic, I assure you. It will be called Adopt a School. That is the Carolinas District Service Project, district-wide service project for this year. It's called Adopt a School. And that also will be at 7 p.m. on December 16th. We hope you can attend. We hope you will tell the members of your club about these two coming up in December and encourage them to register at Carolinas District website or CD News. They're free, they're informative, and again, we hope they will help strengthen your club. That's all I have this evening. Thank you everyone for attending, and I hope that this seminar will be a benefit to you and your clubs.
Thank you, Chris.
Y'all have a great evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.